Welcome to the Daily Brain Podcast. The word today is impetuous.
Impetuous.
Yeah, and like when you blurt out an answer in class without thinking or spend your whole allowance on candy,
Right.
it's basically acting quickly without stopping to think about what might happen next.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like that friend who always jumps off the swing at the highest point.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's awesome, sometimes it's a faceplant.
It's true.
Yeah.
We've all had those oops moments where we acted without thinking.
Right.
But it's important to remember that everyone makes rash decisions sometimes.
Right.
What's really interesting is how impulsivity, when it happens a lot, can affect our lives.
Right.
Imagine applying for a job without reading the description.
Oh, yeah.
Or telling someone off without hearing their side of the story. That's when things can get messy.
Right, because some decisions need more thought than others.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to grab an extra cookie from the jar.
Sure.
But it's a whole other thing to say jump out of a perfectly good airplane without a parachute.
Right.
The Talk Entry article mentions some examples of impulsivity from harmless things like buying something you don't need to, more serious stuff like risky behavior.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that impulsivity isn't just a personality quirk.
Yeah.
It can be influenced by a bunch of things.
Okay.
Our genes, the things we experience, even how our brains are wired, can all play a role. Think of it like this.
Okay.
Some people might be born with a faster impulse button in their brains, while others have one that's a bit slower.
So, like, some people are just naturally more prone to jumping into things head first.
Yeah.
That makes me think of the neurotransmitters we talked about before, like dopamine. Isn't that the feel-good chemical that gets us excited?
Yes. Dopamine plays a big role in how we experience pleasure and reward.
Okay.
For someone with a more sensitive dopamine system, even small things can trigger a rush of excitement, which might make them more likely to act impulsively to chase that feeling.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about our environment?
Yeah.
How do our experiences shape how we react?
Well, imagine someone who's been through a traumatic experience.
Okay.
Their brain might be wired to respond to stress by acting quickly, even without thinking.
Right.
It's like their fight or flight mode gets triggered more easily.
So their past experiences kind of rewire their brains to be more impulsive. That's heavy stuff.
It is, and it highlights the importance of understanding that impulsivity can be a symptom of deeper issues.
Right.
Things like ADHD, where it's hard to focus and control impulses, or bipolar disorder, where moods can swing drastically, can also contribute to impulsive behavior. And of course, we can't forget about the impact of substances.
Oh, right. Like how alcohol can loosen your inhibitions and make you do things you normally wouldn't.
Exactly. Substances can lower our self-control and make us more prone to acting without thinking about the consequences.
Right.
So it's really a complex mix of nature and nurture that shapes how impulsive we are.
This is all pretty complicated, but it's starting to make more sense.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as just saying someone is impulsive.
Right.
There's a whole lot going on under the surface.
Exactly. And you know what's really cool?
Right.
The 16 personality source actually dives into how impulsivity shows up differently in different personality types.
Okay.
Like analysts and diplomats can be impulsively creative or emotional, leading to both brilliant ideas and some, let's say, interesting decisions.
So maybe it's not always a bad thing?
Right.
Like sometimes that quick thinking and spontaneity can be a good thing.
It can.
Tell me more about these personality types.
I'm happy to do. Let's unpack that in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Remember how we were talking about different personality types and how they experience impulsivity?
Yeah.
It's like everyone has their own unique impulsivity fingerprint.
Yeah, that was super interesting.
Yeah.
So tell me more about how these personality types can be impulsive in different ways. What about those explorers you mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
They sound like they might be the most impulsive of the bunch.
You're right. Explorers are definitely known for their love of spontaneity and adventure. They might be the ones who suddenly decide to take a road trip or try a new extreme sport.
Okay.
Their impulsivity is often driven by a thirst for new experiences and a desire to seize the moment. But even sentinels, who are usually super organized and careful, can have their own version of impulsivity.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Those folks who make to-do lists for their to-do lists.
Right.
How can they be impulsive?
Well, imagine a sentinel who's super passionate about following rules.
Okay.
They might impulsively correct someone's grammar or insist on doing things by the book, even when it's not really necessary.
Okay. I see what you mean. It's
Yeah.
like their impulsivity comes out in how strictly they follow their own personal code.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating.
Right.
There's no one-size-fits-all definition of impulsivity. It
Yeah.
really depends on the person and the situation.
This is making me rethink my own impulsive moments.
Oh.
Like, maybe that time I decided to cut my own bangs wasn't entirely a bad decision.
Right.
It was just my inner explorer craving a change.
Maybe. And who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe those uneven bangs led to a new hairstyle you ended up loving.
Totally.
The point is that impulsivity isn't always a bad thing. It can be the spark behind creativity,
Yeah.
quick thinking, and even bravery.
I like that, embracing the good side of impulsivity.
Yeah.
But how do we know when it's helpful and when it's, well, not so helpful?
Yeah.
Like, how can we learn to control those urges when we need to make a more thoughtful decision?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's where things like mindfulness come in. Remember how we talked about how some people have a more sensitive impulse button in their brain?
Yeah.
Mindfulness can help us train our brains to hit the pause button before reacting.
Right. Mindfulness is like becoming aware of what's happening in our minds and bodies.
Exactly.
But how does that actually help with impulsivity? Give me an example.
Okay, so let's say you have a really strong urge to buy that new gadget you've been eyeing. Instead of immediately clicking add to cart, you could try taking a few deep breaths and really paying attention to how your body feels.
Okay.
Are you tense, excited, anxious?
Yeah.
Just noticing those sensations can create a little space between the urge and the action.
So instead of fighting the urge, we just observe it.
Right.
That seems kind of counterintuitive, but I can see how it might help break the cycle of acting impulsively.
Exactly. And sometimes that pause is all we need to make a more thoughtful decision. The Talkiatry article also talked about avoiding triggers.
Okay.
Like if you know you tend to overspend when you're bored, maybe you try to stay away from online shopping sites when you're feeling restless.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like setting yourself up for success by avoiding situations that might lead to impulsive behavior. But what about those times when we can't just avoid the trigger? Like what if it's a person or a situation we can't really escape?
That's a great question, and it leads us to another important strategy.
Okay.
Finding healthy outlets for our impulses. Think of it like redirecting that energy into something positive.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these healthy outlets. What do they look like?
Well, imagine you're feeling frustrated and the impulsive urge to yell is bubbling up.
Right.
Instead of letting it out on someone, you could go for a run, hit the gym, or even just do some jumping jacks.
Yeah.
Physical activity can be a great way to release that pent-up energy in a healthy way.
So we've talked about mindfulness and avoiding triggers, but finding healthy outlets sounds like a really practical way to manage those impulsive urges. What are some other examples of healthy outlets?
It really depends on what you enjoy and what triggers your impulsivity. If you tend to make impulsive purchases when you're feeling down, maybe you could channel that energy into decluttering your closet or learning a new skill. The key is to find something that gives you a sense of accomplishment and helps you redirect that impulsive energy in a positive direction.
I like that. It's like turning that impulse energy into something productive. It reminds me of something we talked about earlier, the idea that impulsivity isn't always a bad thing.
Yeah.
What was that article that talked about historical figures who made impulsive decisions?
Ah, you're thinking about the Tim Challies article. It mentioned how many historical figures, from artists to scientists to political leaders, made decisions on the fly that shaped the course of history. Some of these impulsive moves turned out to be brilliant, leading to major breakthroughs or victories.
Yeah, I remember thinking, wow, sometimes those spur-of-the-moment choices can actually change the world. It makes you wonder if maybe we're too quick to label impulsivity as a negative trait.
That's a good point. It's all about context, isn't it? What might be considered impulsive in one situation could be seen as bold and decisive in another. I think the real challenge is learning to discern when it's appropriate to act on impulse and when it's better to pause and reflect.
That makes me think about those times when I've acted impulsively and it's actually worked out in my favor. Like that time I decided to sign up for that pottery class on a whim. Turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made.
Exactly. Sometimes those spontaneous choices lead us to unexpected joys and opportunities we might have otherwise missed. And even when those impulsive decisions don't work out as planned, they can still be valuable learning experiences.
So maybe it's not about trying to eliminate impulsivity altogether, but more about learning to manage it and channel it effectively.
Precisely. It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between thoughtful deliberation and spontaneous action. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. We're all going to have those moments where we act without thinking. The key is to learn from those experiences and keep practicing those strategies that help us make more intentional choices.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on impulsivity. It's not this scary monster I need to constantly battle. It's more like this energetic force that I can learn to work with.
That's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing that impulsivity is a part of who we are, and it can be both a source of challenge and a source of strength.
So for all of you listening out there, remember that it's okay to be impetuous sometimes. It's what makes us human. It's what fuels our creativity, and it's what allows us to embrace those unexpected adventures that life throws our way.
But also remember that you have the power to choose how you respond to those impulses. You can learn to manage them, channel them, and even leverage them to create a life that's full of both spontaneity and intention.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of impulsivity. We hope you've gained some new insights and maybe even a little inspiration to embrace your own unique impulsivity fingerprint.
Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and never be afraid to take a leap of faith. Just make sure you've got a good safety net just in case.